Horror has two kinds of nightmares: the ones humans cause and create, known as systemic, and the ones the universe throws at us for no reason at all, known as cosmic. Systemic horror is about traps, governments, and corporations, and the second-order effects of human decisions that turn people into monsters. Cosmic horror is about fate, chance, and things too big to understand when the universe itself becomes the villain. We'll uncover the most dominant creators behind both, which type built the more enduring franchises, and why it might be the ultimate hybrid. In 1968, 28-year-old George A. Romero made Night of the Living Dead with just $114,000 and a borrowed camera. One black and white film from Pittsburgh reinvented horror and exposed the rot beneath America's surface. Romero was born in the Bronx and raised on monster movies and comic books. After graduating with a fine arts degree from Carnegie Mellon in 1960, Romero started his career shooting commercials and local TV spots in Pittsburgh. He loved Richard Matheson's apocalyptic novel, I Am Legend, and was hooked by the chaos of the nightly Vietnam broadcasts that dominated the airwaves of 1960s America. Romero was one of the first to recognize the potential power of cinematic horror that felt real, something that looked like it was unfolding on the evening news. Before he created Night of the Living Dead, horror was gothic and distant. It belonged to castles and creatures like Dracula, Frankenstein, and Godzilla. Romero dragged it into the American heartland. Night of the Living Dead followed strangers trapped in a farmhouse as dead, flesh-eating ghouls closed in on them. But the real terror was inside, as survivors turned on each other as it unfolded. Romero cast Dwayne Jones, one of the first black leads in horror. He said Jones was simply the best actor that auditioned, but his presence changed everything. When his character Ben was shot by a white mob at dawn, the film stopped being entertainment. It became a societal mirror. Critics were disturbed, children were traumatized. Quentin Tarantino called Romero a genius for turning a farmhouse into the end of the world. Proof that terror doesn't need massive scale, just truth. Made for $114,000, the film earned about $30 million worldwide. Unfortunately, a copyright error cost Romero his profits, but not his influence. He went on to direct 5 sequels: Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, and Survival of the Dead. Together, they grossed more than $240 million globally and inspired decades of imitators from 28 Days Later to The Walking Dead. So who's the villain here? It's systemic because it reveals how fragile human order is when fear takes hold. Under pressure, the survivors fail to trust each other. Leadership breaks, race divides, but it's also cosmic because the ghouls have no reason. The dead rise without purpose. No science explains it, no faith resolves it. Romero showed a world where people collapse long before the dead reach them. The universe offers no answers, and that emptiness is what makes its villain an unforgettable hybrid of both cosmic and systemic terror, inspiring nearly every major horror filmmaker that followed. If Romero showed how fast order falls apart, Jeffery Reddick asked what happens when order comes for you. Nearly 15 years later, Kentucky native Jeffery Reddick was 14 years old when he mailed a spec script prequel for A Nightmare on Elm Street directly to its producer, New Line Cinema. After initially getting rejected, Reddick kept in touch with Bob Shaye and eventually interned at New Line in New York 5 years later, where he spent the next decade learning how the business worked from the inside. The spark for Final Destination came when Reddick read about a woman who got a call from her mother saying she had a bad feeling about her flight. She canceled at the last minute and the plane later crashed. That story stuck with Reddick. What if death had a plan and someone ruined it? At 29, after years in the mailroom, Reddick sold his script for Final Destination to New Line. He first wrote it as a spec episode of The X-Files, which caught attention inside the studio. New Line paired him with prominent X-Files writers James Wong and Glenn Morgan, who helped expand it into a feature. And unlike horror that came before it, death itself was the villain. When a group of teens cheat fate by skipping a doomed flight, the universe comes to collect, killing them in the order they were meant to die. Every death plays out like a chain reaction of dread, a puddle, a wire, a flame, turning the ordinary into a threat. The terror isn't who will strike, but when. That's what made it cosmic. There's no morality, no reason, no God to blame. The characters aren't fighting corruption or demons. They're fighting the laws of existence itself. They can't cheat death, only delay it. Even the 5th film loops back into the first, closing the cycle and proving that no one escapes the design. Made for $23 million, it grossed over $112 million worldwide, launching a long-running franchise across 6 films. Reddick sold the idea outright to New Line, earning story and executive producer credit on the first film, but no ownership stake. He stayed involved creatively in the early sequels, while the studio kept full control and profits as the series expanded. In 2025, Final Destination, Bloodlines revived the franchise after more than a decade, grossing over $190 million worldwide, the most successful entry in its history. Final Destination created a fresh kind of cosmic terror, one where survival is just borrowed time and the universe always comes to collect. If death has a plan, imagine what a corporation can do with one. In 2002, Resident Evil turned a hit survival horror game into a global film phenomenon. It remixed Romero's zombie blueprint, but showed what happens when science, profit, and power collide, creating a corporate machine that makes monsters. The original Resident Evil game was created by Shinji Mikami at Capcom in 1996. Inspired by Night of the Living Dead and The Shining's Overlook Hotel, Mikami designed it as a claustrophobic puzzle of science gone wrong. It wasn't just zombies, it was a system breaking down from within, built on secrecy and bioweapons. By the late 1990s, the game had become one of the most successful horror IPs in history. That's when British director Paul W.S. Anderson, fresh off Event Horizon, pitched his vision for a cinematic version. Anderson didn't want to simply translate the game. He saw a chance to build his own horror world, blending science fiction with a corporate thriller. The Umbrella Corporation's goal was to weaponize biology for profit, creating viruses to sell cures and soldiers to sell control. The story followed Alice, played by Milla Jovovich, a security officer who wakes up inside a secret lab as the T-virus spreads. Jovovich became the face of the franchise, a human weapon fighting her creators. The action tone and sleek industrial design helped it stand apart from typical zombie films. Critics were divided, but audiences showed up. The first film cost $33 million and earned more than $102 million worldwide. Across 6 films, the franchise grossed more than $1.2 billion globally, plus a 2021 reboot and a Netflix spin-off. Mikami created the world, Anderson industrialized it. Resident Evil succeeded where other game adaptations failed. Because Anderson didn't follow the game's plot, he created space for a new cinematic world that could live on its own. So who's the real villain here? Where Night of the Living Dead leaned hybrid, Resident Evil fully embodies systemic horror. The Umbrella Corporation is a huge drug and tech company that secretly runs dangerous experiments for the military. They tried to create a virus called the T-virus that could bring dead cells back to life and make super soldiers who heal fast and never tire. But the virus backfired. Instead of creating soldiers, it killed people and brought them back as zombies. The outbreak wasn't some random mistake. It happened because Umbrella's scientists kept pushing risky experiments for money and power, turning science itself into a weapon that wiped out everything it touched. The true villain isn't the undead. It's the system that keeps resurrecting them. From labs that break people to rooms that test them. 2 years later, another franchise was launched off the back of a game. But this one was more like an escape room than a video game, and it wasn't in a sci-fi world. In 2004, 2 broke Australians created Saw, a film that turned morality into a blood-soaked game and launched the torture horror subgenre. The story follows 2 men who wake up chained in a filthy bathroom, forced to play a killer's game where survival depends on the choices they make. It wasn't a ghost story or a monster movie. It was a trap built by human hands designed to make people value life through pain. James Wan and Leigh Whannell were 27 when they made it. They met in film school at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology and shared a drive to break into Hollywood. Whannell's idea came after he feared he had a brain tumor and thought he might die young. That fear of running out of time evolved into a 9-minute short film. Their proof of concept they shot for $5,000 and used to pitch the feature. They borrowed Seven's moral puzzles and the Silence of the Lambs psychological tension, building a story where fear came from logic, not the supernatural. The finished film was shot in 18 days on a $1.2 million budget. Saw premiered at Sundance, where Lionsgate picked it up for distribution. It exploded at the box office, grossing over $100 million worldwide. At a time when horror was ruled by ghost stories and Japanese remakes like The Ring and The Grudge, Saw hit different. It was original, brutal, and grounded in human psychology. It didn't rely on the supernatural or nostalgia. Its horror came from what people do when they're trapped and desperate. The film went on to spawn 9 sequels, earning more than $1 billion in total revenue. Their production deal gave Wan and Whannell a share of the first film's profits, but they sold the sequel rights to Lionsgate and Twisted Pictures, a trade that brought fast money but cost them long-term ownership of the series. But they still stayed involved as producers and story contributors while moving on to later create Insidious and The Conjuring, making Wan one of the only directors in history to create multiple billion-dollar horror franchises. So who's the real villain here? The story of Saw is about more than one killer. It's about a system of twisted justice that keeps going even after he's gone. Jigsaw creates deadly traps to make people appreciate life, and his followers keep building them after he dies, turning his ideas into a cycle that never ends. In the end, the real evil isn't Jigsaw himself. It's the belief that pain and punishment can somehow make people better. If one man's rules can ruin lives, wait until the government writes them. In 2013, filmmaker James DeMonaco asked a simple question. What if America made murder legal for one night a year? That idea became The Purge, a franchise that turned government fear into box office firepower. DeMonaco grew up on Staten Island, fascinated by stories about morality and violence. Before The Purge, he wrote action thriller screenplays for The Negotiator and a remake of John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13, where he first met producer Jason Blum. The two shared a taste for confined settings, human tension, and high-concept ideas told on low budgets. The idea for The Purge came after a road rage incident in New York when DeMonaco's wife joked that society might be calmer if people had one night a year to act out their anger. That offhand comment stuck and became the seed for a dystopian America that strategically legalized murder to stay peaceful. The film follows a wealthy security system designer, played by Ethan Hawke, whose family becomes a target when they shelter a stranger during Purge night. Inside one home, DeMonaco showed how easily privilege collapses when rules disappear. Released after a decade ruled by haunted houses, demonic possessions, and found footage fear, The Purge broke from the supernatural. Like Saw, DeMonaco brought horror back to the real world. The concept was cheap, contained, and chillingly plausible. Shot for just $3 million, it earned over $89 million worldwide and proved audiences would show up for horror that felt political instead of paranormal. Its world felt like a future headline, and that's what made it terrifying. DeMonaco wrote and directed the first 3 films, then stayed on as writer and producer for later sequels and the TV series. Across 5 films and 1 show, The Purge has earned more than $530 million worldwide. Each sequel expanded its scope, moving from suburban homes to city streets and even into government corridors. Few creators have stayed as hands-on with their franchise, maintaining the original moral tension across a decade of sequels. So who's the real villain here? On the surface, it's the killers, but in reality, it's the government. In The Purge, the government creates the annual event as a way to control crime, reduce unemployment, and keep the poor population in check. The story's real horror lies in how violence becomes state policy disguised as social stability. DeMonaco used the premise as social commentary on class inequality, gun culture, and how governments can justify cruelty through policy. But Pennywise is the greatest horror franchise villain of them all. Here's why. In 2017, director Andy Muschietti brought It back to life and turned Stephen King's Nightmare into the most successful horror film ever made. It began with Stephen King, who wrote the novel in 1986. He said his goal was to combine everything I know about horror into one story: the haunted house, the slasher, the cosmic evil, and the pain of growing up. King used Derry, Maine as a reflection of America's hidden rot beneath its small-town charm. 3 decades later, Argentine filmmaker and King fan Andy Muschietti, fresh off his horror debut Mama, reimagined the story for a new generation. He kept King's emotion, childhood fear, and friendship, but delivered it with blockbuster scale. It follows a group of outcast kids, the Losers Club, who discover their town is haunted by a shape-shifting being that feeds on fear. Every 27 years, it returns, usually as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. Actor Bill Skarsgård made Pennywise both playful and predatory, smiling one moment and devouring the next. The film balanced terror with nostalgia, turning fear into a story about resilience. 2017's It arrived 27 years after the 1990 TV miniseries. Commanding a relatively bigger budget compared to the recent horror hits that preceded, this It felt like a more epic horror, one with the size of a summer blockbuster. Stranger Things had just reignited 80s nostalgia, and King's story fit perfectly into that cultural moment. It mixed spectacle, heart, and real emotion, a rare blend that made it feel universal. It, Chapter 1, made $701 million, the highest grossing horror film ever. Chapter 2 added another $473 million, bringing the total to over $1.17 billion worldwide. Produced by New Line Cinema, the same studio behind A Nightmare on Elm Street and The Conjuring, made it a natural extension of their horror dynasty. Muschietti went on to direct The Flash, 2023, and now leads the HBO Max prequel, Welcome to Derry. It is the ultimate hybrid of all the big 4 villain types. It's masked because Pennywise appears to be a clown, a smiling mask hiding the monster beneath. Pennywise is possessed horror. He uses disguise and familiarity to draw victims close. He infects minds, shaping himself into each victim's personal nightmare. Fear itself becomes the possession, spreading through the town like a curse. It's systemic because Derry's adults ignore the disappearances, pretending nothing's wrong. The town enables the monster, a metaphor for social decay, prejudice, and willful blindness. And the It mythos is ultimately built on cosmic horror. Beneath the clown is an ancient alien entity older than the universe. King built a mythology where good and evil are forces beyond human understanding. The creature comes from a dimension known as the Macroverse, where it has existed for eons, feeding on fear and taking shapes that mortals can comprehend. It unites every kind of horror: the mask, the possession, the system, and the cosmos. It's about childhood fears that never leave us, made literal, emotional, and mythic. Every archetype that shaped horror lives inside this story. That's why It is the greatest horror franchise ever. It's the first that explains them all. Masked villains are cheap, fast, and built to reboot. Systemic barely ever breaks out, but when it does, it prints sequels. Possessed runs the game now. the biggest box office, and the most growth. And cosmic, that's the rarest horror franchise class of all, too abstract, too risky, and nearly impossible to repeat. Who do you think is the greatest horror franchise villain? Does Pennywise live up to the hype? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our creator's breakdown of masked versus possessed villain franchises that complete the big four. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.